Many thanks. Now call on George Adam to be followed by Jamie McGregor.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. 1969 started quite quietly on a Wednesday, the middle of the week, for such a decade-defining or world-defining year. It's a strange start. For myself, it's quite an important year because it was the year that I was actually born. And I was obviously there to witness it. I was 1 month old at the time, so it's more probably in newsreels and films at a later date that I've actually seen everything. But on that year, there was quite a lot of other groundbreaking things happening in the world as well. And I think, similar to what Ian Gray was saying, that there was an ideal in these days of looking at the big idea, the big picture, the reaching for the stars, actually seeing that we've been all we can be. And at the time, you had the first test flight of Concorde in the same year, plus you had Boeing 747 making its maiden flight. Big issues in 1969 as well. And you have to say to yourself, where have we gone? As a child of the 70s, we grew up wanting to be astronauts. My mother would say to her friends, what does George want to be this week? George wants to be an astronaut. Now, you can see that didn't work out, although some people might say that we're wired to the moon at some times in the Parliament. But I obviously had a political ambition, and when I found out he was an aerospace engineer as well, I found that was probably just a wee bit too much for myself to try and take on at that stage. But in the 70s, it was one of the most important things as a child growing up, because it was important. It was one of these things that you constantly, it was there in the literature, it was there in the television, it was there, and absolutely everywhere you went as a child growing up, it was there. But when I was looking at some of the information, it was interesting to see that Neil Armstrong started off, obviously, in 1958 in the US Air Force's Man in Space Soonest programme, which doesn't sound the sexiest of titles for one of the space programmes, but it was basically to actually design a space plane that would go up and deliver satellites and come back down again. It's funny how some of the ideas from the past end up coming full circle, and we're still talking about some of these things that we're developing it now. The funny thing was that was only just cancelled just before it actually went into full production, and he was one of the only 2 of the pilots in that programme that actually went to space in the future. But obviously, as everyone else has said, in April 1961, Yuri Gagarin started the space race officially by being the first man in space. And Kennedy made his speech in Rice University in September the 12th, 1962, where he actually said those famous words, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." And I think these lines alone define that era and define exactly what everyone was trying to achieve. It wasn't a case of, we can't do that. It was a case of, we can't do it, but let's try and achieve it and do it anyway. And I think it's a lesson that we have to learn ourselves as time now, because I think we've kind of lost the vision thing as politicians, as a community. We've actually lost the idea of looking at the big issues, the big world-changing ideals. As my colleague, Mr Stevenson, quite rightly said, there was so much practical things that came out of the Apollo missions in themselves. Myself, with some of my younger members of staff, I've often talked about getting one of the Apollo 11 models and putting it in my office, just to say that you can achieve the impossible, because everyone, the engineers, everyone was told that they couldn't do it. There was no way they could do it, and that it was just not achievable with the technology they had then. But they did it, they achieved it, and they showed the world, and to this day we are still talking about these things. Much of what I've already thinking of saying has been already said, but I will finish, Presiding Officer, in saying that the Neil Armstrong had a profound effect on my life, and that sounds pretty incredible, that a young boy from Paisley could be motivated by the first man in the moon. But his actions in July 1969 taught me that you can look at the stars and dream, or you can work hard, set targets for yourself and achieve what's perceived to be the impossible. To me, that's not a bad legacy to leave.
Well done. Thank you very much.